Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel where we talk all things finance and investing. Today I have the most inspirational savings and investing real life story that I've ever heard, and I want to share that with you. If you're sat there watching my video and you're thinking you don't earn enough to get up to your goals financially, to become a millionaire or even a multi-millionaire, then today's story is going to show that that's not true and you can do it as well, regardless of how low an income that you're on. So today, let's get into it. We're going to give you the Ronald Read story, and I'll also break down why I think he was able to do this on such a low salary, so we can apply these learnings to you and you can hit your goals as well. All right, so who was Ronald Read? Well, you probably have never heard of him. I hadn't before I read this story. But Ronald Read was born in the US state of Vermont in 1921. He had a normal childhood, went to school, graduated from high school, went into the military, and left the military in 1945 and started to work as a gas station attendant. He spent the next 25 years of his life doing that for his job. After that, he retired for about a year, and then he actually came out of retirement and took on a job as a part-time janitor at JCPenney, the well-known store there in the US. So by all accounts, Ronald was not particularly, special or newsworthy or anything like that. So it was an absolute shock to everybody. When he passed away in 2014, they found that he had $8 million worth of share certificates, stocks that is, in a safety deposit box in a bank that nobody knew that he had accumulated. So how did he do it? I mean, a gas station attendant in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then to become a janitor at JCPenney, these would have been very low paying jobs, something like minimum wage. In fact, some people who knew Ronald Read said he probably never earned more than $20,000 or $25,000 per year, yet he managed to get a portfolio of $8 million. So how did he do it? Well, there's three things really, in my opinion, that enabled him to do this where most others would not be able to do it. So let's break it down a little bit. So lesson one that we can take away from the Ronald Read story is frugality. This guy spent an awful lot less than he earned, and he didn't earn much, like I mentioned a minute ago. He drove a used Toyota Yaris, he chopped his own firewood, his lawyer's office said he used to park further away from their offices where there was no parking meters, barely went out to eat, and if he did, he'd just order a coffee and, as they say, an English muffin with peanut butter, for example. So this guy was extremely frugal, but he employed the lesson of living below his means. He did this and he made that a priority, and that was his decision, and that enabled him, irregardless of how low of a salary he was on, and enabled him to take some of that and get it invested into the stock market. All right, so that leads me to the number two lesson we can take away from Ronald Read and how he did this, and that is discipline. So not only was he frugal and he was taking his money and investing it into the stock market, he didn't do things like small penny stocks. He didn't do technology stocks, for example. His portfolio was made up mainly of blue chip, profitable companies, large companies that were proven over many years, if not decades, to be able to make money. They also paid dividends, and he preferred to invest in dividend stocks. He avoided things like technology because he didn't really understand it. So he kept it very simple. So he took his money and he would buy shares over these years in companies like that made an awful lot of money and paid some of that out in dividends, and no doubt for sure he had his dividends reinvested. And this is what he would do. As it turned out, at the time of his passing, when they looked at his portfolio, he actually had 95 stocks in there. And he would spend time, people say they would see him at the library, he would spend time reading the newspapers like the Wall Street Journal, doing his research and picking his individual stocks himself, which is really fascinating when you think about it. So he would have put a lot of time and effort, but you don't have to do this, as we'll discuss later on. What's amazing to me is, even though he read the newspapers and was up to date on what was happening in the markets, it appears he never sold any of his positions. He was the ultimate buy and hold investor. He would buy it, take the share certificate, lock it away, and never touch it again. So even though the news headlines would have been, very scary at times of market crashes, recessions, and things like that, Ronald Read held his nerve and never let it bother him. He bought and he held, a buy and hold investor. A really good strategy. The other thing that I think helped him in this case is that he kept it quiet. He didn't tell anybody. So rather than tell people and have to hear, oh, the market's going to crash, I think this company is going to go bust, all these bad kind of negative feedback, Ronald Read kept it to himself, and that enabled him to have control of his emotions. And I've said this many times on this channel, controlling your emotions is one of the biggest challenges that I see investors make. Ronald Read did not have this problem. He was able to overcome it. I'm sure there were times through market crashes where he felt like selling off some of his stock, but he never panicked and he never did it. And he just let it compound and let the dividends kept going and let that grow over time. So that leads me to the third lesson in this. He was incredibly patient. He had an investment time horizon of around 65, 67 years or so, which is pretty phenomenal. Because he lived to 92, that went in his favor big time. If you take Warren Buffett, for example, most of his wealth only came after the age of 65. He's worth around $130 billion now. And a lot of that, like I said, was after his age of 65. In Ronald Read's case, it would have been very similar. Remember, and I recently did a video on this on compound interest and compound returns. The longer you hold your investment, the longer time it has to compound, where you're getting a return on your previous year returns. And that is like a snowball rolling down a hill. It just gets bigger and bigger as more and more time goes. And Ronald had an incredibly long time horizon because he started when he was young and he lived up until he was 92. So the bulk of that $8 million fortune that he accumulated, a lot of that would have happened most likely after the time he was 60, 65 years old, like with Warren Buffett. So the main takeaway for that for you is you got to start early. And if you do that, you can allow the power of compound returns to work in your favor. I recently did a video on how your net worth will absolutely soar after you get your first 100K. I'll put a link to that in the description. Watch that so you get a really good understanding of how compound returns can work in your favor like they did for Ronald Read. So use that to your advantage, especially if you're on a low income. And if you're younger, it's the most important thing. The biggest advantage you have is time. So get started as soon as you can. Okay, so we've seen the 3 reasons that Ronald Read was able to achieve this. So if you're sat at home and thinking, well, how can I do this myself? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. The number one thing you need to do is change your mindset and use what he did: frugality and living below your means, spending less than you earn as much as possible and investing that difference. Remember, wealth is the money that you don't spend. And that's the key mindset shift that you need to have. Ronald Read certainly has. Now, Ronald Read decided to pick his own stocks, and he clearly had, a knack for doing this, but he put in the time and he learned and he was willing to do that. But back in his days, they didn't really have index funds and ETFs. I did a video on those. If you're not sure what they are, I'll leave a link in the description as well. But nowadays, you'd be able to use an ETF that would invest in the market, like the S&P 500, for example, or an index fund. And you don't even need to do it yourself. You don't need to do the research and pick the stocks. If you wanted ones that only pay dividends, then you could look at ETFs that invest only in dividend-paying stocks as well. And that is a more simpler way of replicating Ronald Read's strategy. Just remember to get all your dividends reinvested whenever you invest in the stock market and let them compound over the long term. The key here is you need to get started early. And I would also suggest using an automatic investment plan, automatic savings, automatic investment into your account so that the money comes out automatically and gets put into the market, into the index fund or the ETF or the individual shares if you want to go down that road. So that's the story of Ronald Read. Fascinating story. Gas station attendant, part-time janitor, and he was able to accumulate $8 million by the time he died. So if you're wondering what he did with the money, well, it's pretty admirable, to be fair. The majority of it he donated to a hospital and a library, and he also left some for his family as well. So he's also made the sacrifices on behalf of the hospital and the library. So pretty impressive stuff. So there's 3 things you need to really take away to help you do this. 1, he was frugal. 2, he was disciplined. And 3, he was extremely patient. He let it go for 60 years or so. So that's the story of Ronald Read, the incredible, fascinating story of the janitor who accumulated $8 million. So I love doing videos like this. I'm very passionate about saving and investing, and hopefully you see that through my videos. I've done another video on why your net worth will absolutely soar after you hit your first 100,000. If you like the Ronald Read story, you want to learn more about compound returns, then I'll put a link right here. Just click on that. And I wish you all the best in your investing journey.